By the language of the women, Hoichi knew them to be domestics in some noble household. After he'd been helped then to mount some stone steps, upon the last of which he was told to leave his sandals, a woman's hand guided him along interminable reaches of polished planking, and round pillared angles too many to be remembered, and over widths amazing of matted floor, and into the middle of some vast apartment. There he thought that many great people were assembled, for the sound of the rustling of silk kimonos was like the sound of leaves in a forest. Hoichi was told to put himself at ease, and he found a kneeling cushion ready for him. After having taken his place upon it and tuned his instrument, the voice of a woman addressed him, saying, "It is now required that the history of the Heike clan be recited to the accompaniment of the biwa. Recite the story of the battle at Dan no Ura." So then Hoichi lifted up his voice and chanted the chant of the fight on the bitter sea, wonderfully making his biwa to sound like the straining of oars, and the rushing of ships, and the whir and the hissing of arrows, and the shouting of trampling of men, and the crashing of steel upon helmets, the plunging of the slain into the flood. And to left of right of him, in praise of his playing, he could hear voices murmuring, "How marvellous an artist! Never in our own province was playing heard like this. Not in all the empire is there another singer like Hoichi." And this gave him more courage, and he played and sang yet better than before, and a hush of wonder deepened about him. But when at last he came to tell the fate of the fair and the helpless, the piteous perishing of the women and the children, the death leap of the infant emperor's nurse with the imperial infant in her arms, then all the listeners uttered together one long, long, shuddering cry of anguish. And thereafter they wept and wailed so loudly and so wildly that the blind man was frightened by the violence of the grief that he had made. But gradually the sounds of lamentation died away, and then Hoichi heard the voice of the woman before. "Although we had been assured that you were a very skillful player upon the biwa, we did not know that anyone could be so skillful as you have proved yourself tonight. Our Lord has been pleased to say that he intends to bestow upon you a great reward. But before that, he desires that you shall perform before him once every night for the next 6 nights, after which time he will probably make his return journey. Tomorrow night, therefore, you are to come here at the same hour. The samurai who tonight conducted you here will be sent for you. It is also required that you shall speak to no one of your visits here. During the time of our Lord's sojourn at Amagaseki, he is travelling incognito." And so Hoichi returned to the temple. It was almost dawn when Hoichi returned, but his absence from the temple had not been observed, as the priest, coming back at a very late hour, had supposed him asleep. Therefore, during the day, Hoichi was able to take some rest, and he said nothing about his strange adventure. In the middle of the following night, the samurai again came for him, and led him to the great assembly, where he gave another recitation with the same success that had attended his previous performance. But during this second visit, his absence from the temple was discovered, and after his return in the morning, he was summoned to the presence of the priest, who said to him, in a tone of kindly reproach, "We have been very anxious about you, friend Hoichi. To go out blind and alone at so late an hour is dangerous. Why did you go out without telling us? I could have ordered a servant to accompany you. And where have you been?" Hoichi answered evasively, "Oh, pardon me, kind friend. I had to attend some private business, and I could not arrange the matter at any other hour." The priest was surprised, and suspected something wrong. He privately instructed the men servants of the temple to keep watch upon Hoichi's movements, and to follow him in case that he should have to leave the temple again after dark. On the very next night, Hoichi was seen leaving the temple, and the servants immediately lit their lanterns and followed after him. But it was a rainy night, and very dark, and before the temple folks could get to the roadway, Hoichi had disappeared. He had clearly walked very fast, a strange thing considering his blindness, for the road was in a bad state. The men looked through the streets, making inquiries at every house which Hoichi was accustomed to visit, but nobody had seen him. At last, as they were returning to the temple by way of the shore, they were startled by the sound of a biwa, furiously played, in the cemetery of Amidaji. The men at once hastened to the cemetery, and there they discovered Hoichi sitting alone in the rain before the memorial tomb of the infant emperor, making his biwa resound and loudly chanting the chant of the Battle of Dan no Ura. And behind him and about him and everywhere above the tombs the fires of the dead were burning. Never before had so great a host of Onnibi been seen in the sight of mortal men. "Hoichi-san! Hoichi-san!" the servants cried. "You are bewitched! Hoichi-san!" Hoichi tried to avoid their disruption. He said, "To interrupt me in such a manner before this august assembly will not be tolerated." But the servants now seized him and pulled him forcibly up to his feet, and by main force hurried him back to the temple, where he was immediately relieved of his wet clothes by order of the priest and reclad and made to eat and drink. And then the priest insisted upon a full explanation of his friend's astonishing behavior. Hoichi long hesitated to speak, but at last he related everything that had happened from the time of the first visit of the samurai. And then the priest said, "Oh, Hoichi, my poor friend, you are now in great danger. Your wonderful skill in music has brought you into strange trouble. By this time you must be aware that you have not been visiting any house whatever, but have been passing your nights in the cemetery, among the tombs of the Heike clan. All that you have been imagining was illusion, except the calling of the dead. And by once obeying them, you have put yourself in their power. If you obey them again, after what has already occurred, they will tear you in pieces. They would have destroyed you already, sooner or later, in any event. Now, I shall not be able to remain with you tomorrow night. I am called away to perform another service. But before I go, it will be necessary to protect your body by writing the holy texts upon it." And so, before sundown of the following night, the priest and his acolyte stripped Hoichi, and then with their writing brushes they traced upon his breast and back, his head and face and neck and limbs and hands and feet, even upon the soles of his feet, even upon his genitalia, they wrote the holy calligraphy called Hanya Shin Kyo. When this had been done, the priest instructed Hoichi, saying, "Tonight, as soon as I go away, you must sit yourself on the veranda and wait. You will be called, but whatever may happen, do not answer, and do not move. Say nothing and sit still as if meditating. If you stir or make any noise, you will be torn asunder. Do not be frightened, and do not think of calling for help, because no help can save you. If you do exactly as I tell you, the danger will pass, and you will be free from their control." After dark, the priest and the acolyte went away, and Hoichi seated himself on the veranda according to the instructions given him. He laid his biwa on the planking beside him, and assuming the attitude of meditation, remained quite still, taking care not to cough or even to breathe audibly. For hours he stayed thus. And then, from the roadway, he heard the clink, clink, clink of the ghostly samurai impending. They passed the gate, crossed the garden, approached the veranda, stopped directly in front of him. "Hoichi!" the deep voice called. But the blind man held his breath and sat motionless. "Hoichi!" grimly called the voice a second time, then a third time, savagely, "Hoichi!" Hoichi remained still as a stone, and the voice grumbled, "No answer? Well, that won't do. I must see where he is." And there was the noise of his heavy feet mounting upon the veranda. He explored the entire temple complex, looking for the biwa player. At last, the voice returned close to Hoichi and uttered, Well, here is the biwa, but of the biwa player I see nothing. But wait, what is this? And then Hoichi felt at both sides of his head the two hands of the samurai grip his ears with such ferocity, such vice-like strength, and yet Hoichi bit his lip and did not call out. I see 2 ears. So that explains why he did not answer. He had no mouth to answer with. There is nothing left of him but his ears. Now to my lord those ears I will take, in proof that the commands have been obeyed as far as was possible. And then Hoichi felt his ears torn from his head. He felt the grinding and the ripping of cartilage away from the bone of his skull. And yet he did not move. He did not call out. His willpower was paramount and succeeded in resting totally immobile. Before sunrise, the priest came back. He hastened at once to the veranda in the rear, stepped and slipped on something clammy, and uttered a cry of horror, for he saw, by the light of his lantern, that the veranda was covered in blood. And he perceived Hoichi sitting there, still in the attitude of meditation, with the blood oozing from each side of his head. "Oh, my poor Hoichi!" cried the startled priest. "What is this? You've been hurt." "Oh, poor Hoichi. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. Everywhere upon your body the holy text had been written, except your ears. I trusted my acolyte to do that part of the work. It was very wrong of me not to have made sure that it had been done myself. Oh, Hoichi. Hoichi. Such bravery. Hoichi, you're free. The danger is past. You will never again be troubled by those ghostly visitors." And with the aid of a good doctor, Hoichi eventually recovered from his injuries. He had lost the outer casing of his ears, but he retained his hearing, and the story of his strange adventure spread far and wide, and soon made him famous. Many noble persons went to Akamagaseki to hear him recite, and large presents of money were given to him, so that he became a wealthy man. And from the time of his adventure, he was known by the name Mimi Nashi Hoichi, Hoichi the Earless.
Welcome back. Thank you very much, Philip John. That was
you're
brilliant.
welcome. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I loved it. Very interesting story. Richard, you were saying something about it's a film as well?
Yes, it was doing a film in the early 60s, and it's in various segments. There's different stories in it, and there's a very good one about the UK owner, the Snow Woman, who is a sort of thermal vampire that sucks the heat out of any traveller she finds. This particular story, she falls in love with one of 2 woodcutters. She kills the old one, falls in love with the younger one, and makes him promise never ever to tell anybody that he's seen her. And then years later he marries a beautiful woman and has 2 children. And then one night he tells his wife that she reminds him of someone he met years and years ago, and he recites the story of the Snow Woman, and it turns out that she is the Yuki-onna, and she leaves him and takes her children with her.
Because he's broken his word, never to mention it. Yeah, that film is amazing. I must agree with Richard. If you're at all interested in, well, either cinema or Japanese folklore or world mythology, you have to see this film. It's called Kwaidan, and we were just discussing it. It's all filmed on sound stages, and so it has a wonderful kind of theatrical quality to it, and the colours in the film are just amazing. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's a work of art.
Well, that was just brilliant reading, and that actual music we were listening to while you were reading, that is Nasuno Yoichi playing, and this biwa music that we found. So very
Fantastic.
Interesting instrument, and very interesting sound.
Yeah, really unique, as is, well...
Is it an ancient instrument?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so it's like a lute, isn't it, Richard? But it's plucked with a kind of a plectrum.
Yeah.
And I don't know, is that 4 strings, something like that?
Four strings.
So, yeah.
It's 4 strings. Yeah, I'm seeing it now in the video, and it's played with a kind of a fan type of.
Yeah, so that's the plectrum kind of thing. But it's a. The not to be confused with the shamisen, of course, which is the most ecologically unfriendly musical instrument of all time. It's kind of got a rare turtle provides the shell for it. The strings are made of like animal guts and stuff. It's cat guts, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, a violin bow is made from horse's hair, and I think some strings are made from.
At least you don't have
something.
to kill the horse to get the hair.
No, I mean, I suppose you get it. Well, but I think some of the strings are made from, I think, something organic.
Right, yeah. And it's also a particular kind of wood, which is also really, really precious. Yeah, of course.
Amazing instrument. Well, thank you very much. That was just brilliant. And
you're welcome.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the shows that you're doing currently?
Yeah, thanks. So I co-founder of a theatre company called Four of Swords Theatre, and we specialise in site-specific adaptations, mainly adaptations of classic literary stories. Regular listeners may remember from 2 or 3 weeks ago when I was on with Louis and mentioned this. So we're gearing up for a few things. We've got a project coming up with Plymouth University, which we're very excited about, which is going to be a complete departure for us, and using a bit of forum theatre, and that's going to be really, really new and different. But also we are just applied for funding for our next project, which is going to be Frankenstein. So we've got fingers crossed that we get funding for that, and that can go ahead. And then I've got, as a little side project, really, we 3 friends and myself put together a cabaret. It was written and directed by a chap called Matt Lawrenson, who lives in Tiverton. And Matt is an amazing performer. He's got a background in circus, and his circus skills are amazing. His clowning skills are amazing. He does tightrope walking and juggling and stuff. Some of which appears in the cabaret, and he wants to put together a cabaret which channeled a lot of our interests in the occult, and so there's a seance basically at the heart of this cabaret, and that's going to be at the Oak Room in Tiverton, which is a kind of reclaimed church there, which is a really interesting building. It's been an arts centre and cafe for a little while now. It's just one night at the moment, but I guess it's going to be, the plan is to make it a pilot so that we can see how the audience responds to it, tweak it as necessary, and then bring it back in the new year.
Yeah, you could always do a recurring cabaret.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Matt wants to do it in such a way as it can be easily taken to different towns and villages, maybe a rural touring network, or Villages in Action.
Cool.
Along those lines, yeah.
And I guess something like the Fringe Festival.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Might be great. Yeah. Do you know about the is it the Barnstable Fringe Theatre Fest?
I think I might have heard of it.
Yeah, that's an interesting one that I've just been looking at. You might also be interested in it, Alison. It's because they run it by lottery. Do you know about this, Richard?
No.
They run it by lottery, so everybody who wants a spot at the festival just puts in an application, and they just choose them at random. And I think the theatre companies get the 100% of ticket sales. So it's a really nice little festival, or it sounds like a nice little festival to be a part of. So
when does that run?
I believe it might be June.
Okay.
Yeah, but you don't quote me on that.
That sounds good. Yeah, I'm definitely going to look into that. Maybe throw something together.
Well, why not? Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah. Thank you very much. So, and just remind us again, what is your website and where can we find more information?
It is www.for-of-swords.com.
Okay, so for-of-swords.com.
You got it. Yeah, don't forget the hyphens. But I mean, if you Google For of Swords Theatre, we'll be at the top hit. So.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. But still, it's good to get the website out there.
Indeed it is. Thank you.
People can remember. Thank you very much. That's just been fantastic, and we'll have to have you back on again to do some more storytelling. You've got a great voice, and that was a really, really excellent dramatic reading. So. Sorry, I definitely have to have you.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I'd love to come back anytime.
And yeah, when you do these other shows with Plymouth University and stuff, do keep us informed and
awesome, will do.
Come back on to talk about that. Okay, we're going to go have a little musical break. This is the Fog Main theme, which it says here was composed by John Carpenter again. So I don't know if it's this one or I thought it was Halloween that he composed. He might have composed both of them. Anyways, we're going to have a little listen to that, and we'll be right back. Goodbye.
Live and local from the heart of Exeter, this is Phonic FM.
Hello, welcome back to Exe Files Paranormal Radio on Phonic FM 106.8. I'm your host, Alison Rockbrand. I'm here with my co-host, Richard Freeman. Hello, Richard.
Hello.
We are into the second hour of our 2-hour special, so don't freak out. It's not, we haven't forgotten what time it is. This is the 2-hour Halloween special. We've just had some incredible live story reading from Philip John. Thank you very much, Philip. And we are now going to have another extremely special event. This is a story written by Richard Freeman himself. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about it, Richard?
This is a story called Drake's Briar, and it comes from a collection of stories that I wrote called Green and Pleasant Land. I wrote it primarily because I'm a great fan of horror, but I'm really disillusioned with horror these days. Every time you watch a horror film, it's vampires again, or it's zombies again, or it's werewolves again. So I tapped into British folklore, and all my monsters and creatures and entities are things from British folklore, and that's why it's called Green and Pleasant Land. This story is called Drake's Briar, and it's read by the wonderful voice artist Silas Hawkins, and his father, who's also a voiceover artist, did the original voices for the Daleks and the Cybermen in Doctor Who back in the 1960s.
Fantastic. I can't wait. And that music we just heard, by the way, I forgot to mention, that was, of course, The Fog, John Carpenter's The Fog, one of my favourite films. Another excellent film. I guess I'm a John Carpenter fan.
Every time it comes on telly, that film, I try and watch it, but then I find out that I've missed it.
Oh no! For those of you that didn't get that you'll be getting it tomorrow at some point. Oh, I see the mist. He missed the mist. So we have these all the time with Richard, and we don't get them till next Tuesday. Thank you very much, Richard, and I hope you enjoy this. This is a kind of a very special event for us. One of Richard's own stories, read by the is he infamous? Shall I say infamous or famous?
He's very well known as a voiceover artist.
But is he famous? Is he infamous as well as famous?
Well, he's infamous at the Weird Weekend.
Yeah, there we go. So, and this was read at the Weird Weekend.
This was read at the Weird Weekend a few years back.
So this is recorded at the Weird Weekend.
Yeah, and the last Weird Weekend he was at earlier in the year, he nearly died trying to rescue a gannet on some cliffs and had to be rescued by a helicopter.
I think you told me that story. So he is infamous. There you go.
Yeah.
Do you want to just tell us a little bit about the Weird Weekend for people that don't know what that is?
The Weird Weekend is... I'm a cryptozoologist, and I work for the Centre for Fortean Zoology, an organisation that studies and hunts for and writes about mystery animals and monsters all around the world. And once a year we have a Fortean convention where we have other cryptozoologists, ufologists, parapsychologists, ghost hunters, anything weird and bizarre, and they all come to Heartland in North Devon, to the small school in Heartland, and we have a 3-day convention. It's usually the third weekend in August.
Okay, so there you have it, the Weird Weekend. This was recorded live at the Weird Weekend?
Yes, yeah. Yes, a few years back.
In 2012, and it is Silas Hawkins reading Richard Freeman's bedtime story, Drake's Briar. So enjoy that, and we'll be back soon. Goodbye.
Second from his anthology, Green and Pleasant Land, and it's called Drake's Briar. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. They look like an army. The police in their helmets armed with batons, crouching behind riot shields. They look like Nazi stormtroopers. Behind them loom the diggers and bulldozers. The beams of their headlamps falling like spotlights on the scene. They were an army, and this was a battle in a very real war, and we were ready to take the fight to them. I was crouching low, in one of the lookout posts on the edge of Elfland. Well, that's what we called it. Elfland, the rambling network of tree houses and rope bridges that had been my home for the last 6 months. I glanced around, taking in some of the faces I knew from the crowds of Elflanders now amassed to fight for their homes and for the survival of Drake's Briar Woods. Kingsley Evans, the 6-foot punk with a pink mohawk and an absurd voice like a cartoon mouse. Crazy Lil with a shaven head and extensive tattoos. Billy the Troll, a hairy little Scotsman, so called from his ability to dig and live in tunnels. Oddest of all was Mrs. Parkhurst's, Elfland's oldest resident, a 70-year-old widow from the little town of Drake's End. She'd hated the proposed relief road and fought for the survival of the woods from the outset. She had been living in the ragged conglomeration of arboreal shanties longer than I had. I clutched the cricket bat to my chest and tensed myself for the police charge. Beside me were several petrol bombs and canisters of homemade napalm, a nasty mixture of Vaseline, polystyrene and petrol. I always knew it would come to this, the final battle. But the reality of being there, the thick, pendulous atmosphere made my stomach turn over. And then, from behind our ranks, came a voice. And when he'd eaten all he could, and when he'd had his fill, he crawled away and wound his tail 9 times about the hill. He stepped out of the shadows and pushed his way towards the front line. Walking forwards into no man's land, he stood before the police and work crew as bold as brass. It was Goldface. Goldface had always been a part of Drake's Briar as far as I was concerned, a semi-legendary character. I played in the woods as a boy. My friends and I would dare each other to go deeper into where the light didn't shine, into where the mad tramp lived. He would come scuttling out of the shadows, muttering under his breath, or sometimes loom from behind an ancient oak or yew, silent as a ghost. I guess he must have looked pretty much like the average tramp. He wore a fading black trench coat, even in the middle of summer. About it was tied a piece of hairy string in lieu of a belt. He had shabby grey trousers and hobnail boots. He had a long, unkempt beard that gave him his name, always flecked with spittle, filth and crumbs. It was almost as if he was cultivating something in it. His weather-beaten face had a Fagin-esque hooked nose and 2 matte, pallid eyes that shone out through the grime. He looked like some ungodly cross between Old Father Time and Albert Steptoe. And the woods themselves were just as odd. According to the maps, Drake's Briar covered around 300 acres, yet it seemed so much bigger. Perhaps it just looked that way through a child's eyes, but the odd effect still struck me when I returned as an adult. Even at the edges, very little light penetrated. It was filtered through the dense canopy of herbage above. This gave the woods an odd sort of constant verdant twilight. Everything seemed tinted green. In Drake's Briar, you could think yourself in the middle of the Siberian taiga. It seemed so distant, so far from civilization. And at its centre stood Worm Hill. Worm Hill rose several hundred feet about the middle of the woods. Visible for miles around, it was a well-known local landmark. No sheep ever grazed there. It was encircled by rings forming tiers of its sides. The local legend was that they were formed by the coils of a dragon that laired in the hollow hill and came out to wrap itself around the mound. We climbed up it on a number of occasions. We were always out of puff by the time we reached the top, but it was worth it for the view. Miles of the North York moors were visible. On a clear day, you could just about make out Whitby on the coast to the east. We would run down the spiral coils in the hill, imagining the size the beast needed to make them. My dad told me Worm Hill was actually an Iron Age hill fort, and the circles were its ramparts. Apparently, in the early 1960s, a team of archaeologists from Leeds University dug there. The dig only lasted a week and then closed down abruptly. Apparently, nothing of note was found. The team's leader, Professor Amos Hartley, retired afterwards. The hill had been left undisturbed ever since. As we got older, our fear of Goatface lessened. Well, he never actually did anything to us. He was never aggressive or unkind. He was just there. You would see him in the woods. He might stare briefly, but then he'd away into the trees like an animal. He lived deep in the centre of the woods. I only saw his arm a couple of times. It was in a thick, tangled stand of blackthorn. I stumbled on it quite by accident. He'd woven the thorny branches together to form tunnels running to a central dome of woven thicket and corrugated iron with old bits of tarpaulin strung across it. A makeshift chimney rose from it, black and sooty. It wasn't us who gave him his name. It was an older boy, Keith Beefy Johnson. Beefy Johnson was the bully at Drake's End Middle School, though he was quite a coward on his own. Beefy usually had an entourage of henchmen, the Beefy Johnson gang. They took to hanging around the woods. They gave the old man the name of Goatface. They torment him, screaming, "Goatface, Goatface!" over and over, throwing stones and then running when he hobbled after, swinging the gnarled old walking stick he always carried. He wheezed horribly and dribbled phlegm down his beard. He mumbled and hissed, but I could never make out the words. They sounded foreign. Sometimes he would play strange music on a set of carved black pipes. The eerie, disturbing sound would float down through the woods, sounding more like a piping language than music. I was amazed when my granddad said he knew him. Abner Skinner were his real name, he said. His family came from up Northumbria way. I knew him when I was at university down in Leeds. My granddad had done 3 years at the university, rare for a working class bloke in those days. He studied farming and agriculture, but not long after the war. He'd been a bright lad and won a scholarship. He went on to farm rapeseed just outside Wakefield. Wouldn't credit it, would you, lad? He were bloody clever once. Best in year. He wouldn't just have been a farmer. He'd have got a job down the old slope with the agriculture department or something. I couldn't believe it was the same bloke, mate. Well, what happened, Grandad, if he was so clever like? What happened to him? I asked. Went mad, son. Mad as a bag of spoons. He got a dose of religion. Oh, don't ask me which one. Some crackpot foreign rubbish, I think. Anyways, he found this old book in one of them creaky old bookshops up Ebden Bridge way. Said it told him how to grow crops really fast, and no matter how poor the soil was.
Something to do with old gods and earth fertility. The more he read, the loonier he got. He'd wander up onto the moors and in the woods for days on end. Missed lectures, never wash, come back to his digs covered in dirt and blood. Yeah, some of the other students said he was sacrificing cats and chickens to something up in Drake's Briar, but well, I can't say if it were true or not. He said he had a theory that would revolutionise farming. Said there would be no hunger ever again. Now this was just after the war. People were still being rationed. That's why his tomfoolery was tolerated up at the university. Up to a point. I could have made it big. I think he could have really done something special, groundbreaking. But then one night he was caught wandering through campus covered in mud and blood, screaming his ruddy head off. He was thrown off the course and kicked out of his lodgings. He just up and left for the woods. Lived there ever since. Never been right in the head since. He's a wrong on that bloke. I often wondered what the old man lived off. I suppose he must pick berries and grow his own food. I thought he must have some livestock, because on several occasions I heard him mention feeding it. They seemed to be the only words he said that were not gibberish. The Beefy Johnson gang continued to torment Goldface for a couple of years. Then Beefy disappeared. No body was ever found, despite a massive police search. No one was ever charged. Well, I suppose they would have questioned old Abner Skinner, but I never heard anything about it. The Johnsons moved away down south. Some of the people in the village suspected that mad old bastard up in the woods had done Beefy in. They spoke darkly about him, but well, no one ever did anything. My mum wouldn't let me play in those woods after that. My mates' mums all did the same thing. Well, that was in the summer of 1977. I didn't see Goldface again for years. I grew up, left school, attended college, and finally moved away to study ecology at Cardiff University. I joined Greenpeace there and went on several protest marches and rallies. It was just after my graduation that I heard of the government plans to run a road straight through my childhood playground. There were bee orchids in Drake's Briar. There were red squirrels. Some said there were even mouse-eared bats. Stuff you really find elsewhere. The woods were like a little national park. The plan was to run a relief road through the woods and skirt around Worm Hill. It would destroy many acres and bisect the forest. The danger the heavy traffic would pose to wildlife was obvious. Well, I left immediately to join the direct action protest. The thought of another piece of green stripped away forever made my blood boil. The fact that it was my piece of green made me all the more angry. The group grew over the weeks and months, as did Elfland. I was surprised to find Goldface was still alive and well. We didn't see him that often. Well, usually we would hear his unsettling music rising through the woods when the moon was fat. A wet, reedy piping, pregnant with strangeness. When we did bump into him on some deep woodland path, he would never speak, but gave us a nod as if he knew what we were doing and was grateful. I almost got to like him. Almost. We'd cost the government hundreds of thousands of pounds and had put their nasty little project back months. Roadblocks, iron spikes
spikes in tyres and caterpillar tracks, sand in engines. Yeah, we tried all the tricks. Now, looked like it was all over. We were well entrenched, but vastly outnumbered. All that stood between the police and the diggers and us was Abner Skinner, old goat face. The sun was crawling behind the horizon, wrapping the whole scene in the ethereal cloak of twilight. The old man cast off the huge trench coat and stood bare-chested. His scrawny body was a network of scars, strange symbols carved into his flesh. I had an unpleasant feeling that they were self-inflicted. He threw back his head and bellowed, an animalistic primal scream that I found hard to equate with such a frail-looking old man. And then he began jabbering. Well, if they were words, then they were not in any language known to me. They sounded more like guttural snorts, high-pitched whines and horrid chitterings. Perhaps they were vestiges of the original primal language rising up from the old man's subconscious. Who knows? The police must have been slightly taken aback, but they didn't do anything. At the height of his maniacal ravings, he threw back his head and whipped a black-bladed knife out of his malodorous pocket. Quick as a flash, he was cutting sigils in his own flesh, opening up swirls and curves of flesh that wept tears of blood. His hands moved fast across his pigeon chest, whilst his face seemed lost in a ghastly expression, almost orgasmic ecstasy. As the rills of gore fell into the dust, he shrieked something that I think must have been an invocation, a calling, the name of something. There was a dry rustling from the woods behind us. Something stirred the treetops and made the dead leaves dance in tiny waltzes. The ground began to tremble as if something was stirring beneath our feet. A murmur broke out among the ranks, and then someone noticed the police were staring not at us, but behind us. As one, the crowd turned and looked up at Worm Hill. There seemed to be a kind of odd nimbus around it, like a heat haze. It seemed to trace a path down the ruts that encircled the hill. The effect seemed to move with an Ophidian grace. It ran like water down the tracks, forming coils about the hill. As I watched, trying to work out what was causing the strange sight, I noticed that it seemed to be solidifying. The haze was becoming more like greenish light. The front end of the phenomenon reached the foot of the hill and seemed to slide into the trees. There was a rustling in the woods that began to grow as coil after coil of green light slithered down from the hill and entered the woods. None of us knew what it was. I think we were all imagining it to be some kind of trick Skinner had engineered. I recall being impressed at that point and wondering how the old bugger had pulled it off. None of us were ready for what came next. Out of the woods came a sound. It was like nothing I'd ever heard. I could try to explain it as being bird-like, a sort of thundering screech, but that would not do it justice. It had more bass. It was almost as if the sound was inside my head rather than external, but I know that can't be right. As I saw the others react to it, the noise seemed to stir something deep in my memory, something bad. There was another sound accompanying the screech. It was like the sails of an old-fashioned ship unfurling, or huge carpets being beaten. I realised with shock that I was listening to the beating of huge wings. We didn't scream. Not at first. We couldn't even move. What came crashing out of those woods, half slithering, half flapping, burnt itself onto the mind of everyone that saw it, together with one word: dragon. It was huge, hundreds of feet long. It rose from the shadows of Drake's Wood, its titan-backed wings half open. Armoured scales glistened an iridescent green, the sheen making rainbow patterns like oil on water. 4 tree-trunk-thick legs terminated in clutching scythe talons. The tail seemed to trail on endlessly into the woods with an unceasing writhing and coiling. At the end of the long neck was a horned head, a reptilian nightmare. I saw row upon row of curved white teeth, strong as steel, sharp as razors. A great forked tongue flickered in and out of the scimitar-lined jaws, tasting the air. Caustic saliva dripped from the maw, hissing like water on a hot plate. But it wasn't the teeth that scared me the most, it was the eyes. Vast orbs of golden fire with black slits. They looked so old, so very, very old, as it turned to glance down at the Elflanders. It regarded them with a vile understanding. The wings opened and beat once. It was up over the crowd, landing with an uncanny agility in no man's land. The jaws opened and it spat forth a white fire. Bulldozers exploded, cartwheeling high in the air and crashing down in charred ruin. The police, caught in the blinding white-hot blast, were dead before they hit the floor. The heat boiled their innards, sending them vomiting from their own mouths as flaming liquid flesh. They danced briefly like ghastly marionettes before becoming wisps of carbon. Those who escaped the blast ran, bowels empty. The dragon fell upon them, the jaws flashed down and seized a victim. It hoisted him aloft and shook him like a bull terrier might shake a rat. Again and again the jaws flashed as it snapped up human prey with a lurid, wet crunching. A handful of the men had escaped, running madly into the night. The beast could easily have caught them or struck them down with a jet of flame. I think it wanted them to escape. It wanted them to tell their masters what they had seen at Drake's Briar. I was doubled up, wretched, as were most of the other protesters around me. Some had fouled themselves. I saw Billy the Troll scoop up a prone Mrs. Parkhurst and run for cover. It screeched again, and some dark memory rose inside me. I was a frightened ape running across a plain under a hot sun, running for my life. A puny mammal that shat and pissed as it scampered for cover with other mewling members of its kind. A massive black shadow fell across the land as an airborne predator whirled above us. The screech came again, echoing through the ages, through the countless generations, across species and into the present day. The race memory faded, leaving me in spasms. I heard a human voice and my mind clutched at it like a drowning man grabbing a branch. I knew he'd come, the old worm. He'd come all right if he thought his home was getting messed with. I heard Agnes. Him's like an adder. Hibernates. But as an adder sleeps months, he can sleep eons. There's loads of them all over the world. Just not time for him to wake up yet. He began to laugh. Almost doubling up as much as me in his sickness. The monstrous creature folded its leather wings and and slithered back into the woods. As it went, it seemed to be losing form again, becoming more ethereal. I turned my head up towards the hill and saw the shimmering coils slipping ghost-like into the side of the hill itself. Goatface, his wounds now quite healed, calmly picked up his coat and followed it. I wondered about his words, about just when would be the right time for them to wake up. I never went back to Drake's Briar. The government abandoned its plans for the relief road. An inquiry into what happened stated that one of the bulldozers had exploded due to a serious electrical fault. The flames had engulfed several more machines and ignited their petrol tanks. The men were killed in the ensuing explosion. I've not seen any of my old friends from Elfland. I think that, like me, they've given up direct action. I now live in central London, as far as I can from any wood. Still, when the wind whips up the trees in the park, making the branches sway, or clouds send big shadows sweeping across the land, I shake. The ancient screech of the dragon still reaches down through time. Haunt what little sleep I have.
Welcome back to Exe Files Paranormal Radio on Phonic FM 106.8. That was a short story by our co-host Richard Freeman. Hello, Richard.
Hello again.
I'm your host, Alison Rockbrand. I'm here with my co-host Richard Freeman, and that was one of his stories read by Silas Hawkins. It is called Drake's Briar, and that was recorded at the Weird Weekend live recording there. So, so interesting stuff, interesting story. And we've got just a couple of minutes before we have to go, and we thought we would share one or two creepy tales that have happened to us. And so I will share one first. And this is something that happened to me in London when I used to go on this ghost walk. I used to do it in the middle of the night because I lived in a part of London which had a bus route, night bus, which would go straight to Fleet Street. And I used to do this ghost walk around Fleet Street and Smithfield Market and so on, St. Bart's Hospital. And this is a very evocative area because there were executions and so on going on around there. And it's the Roman city, and it's the old town of London, and part of it was destroyed by the fire and so on. And one time after the walk, and I was getting on the bus at 3 a.m. and the bus driver, I was the only person getting on the bus, and the bus driver said, "Well, what are you doing? Like, sort of getting on the bus at 3 a.m." And I told him, "Oh, well, I was just doing this ghost walk." And he told me the story about how he had seen a ghost, and he said that he used to do this ride up in Epping Forest, and he used to do the night route in Epping Forest and drive down these very deserted lanes in Epping Forest, which I know I've been there, and there's these sort of forest-laden lanes up in Epping Forest, and it's very dark, and there's like 3 street lamps for, maybe a mile. And he said he was driving on one of these lanes, and no one ever gets on there, he said, because it's like 3 a.m. Why would anybody be in the middle of the forest? But he said one night only, an old man was there at the bus stop. And the old man got on the bus. He stops the bus. The old man gets on, and he noticed that the old man didn't pay. The old man went to sit in the back of the bus, and this was one of those 1-story buses, right? Not the 2 stories. And he looked back, and he was like, "Oh, should I ask him to pay? No, forget it. He's there's only one guy in the bus, and I'm not going to bother him." And so, anyways, he goes on, and he drives the bus, and he forgets about the old man, and he drives and drives and drives, and the old man doesn't get off. And he arrives finally at the bus depot, and he goes, "Wait a minute, what about that old man? He must be asleep. He never got off the bus." And he turns around, and the old man was gone. And he said, "I swear this happened to me. I saw this old man. He was a real person. He got on the bus, and he did not get off, and he disappeared." And he said, "I then started to ask around at the bus depot, like other bus drivers, had anyone ever had this experience?" And apparently, not only had he been seen by other bus drivers, but a couple of years before, an old man had been killed that same place, crossing the street to get to the bus stop in the middle of the night, and that apparently was this old man's ghost. And this is one of the only times a person has told me directly. And this bus driver said, I don't believe in ghosts. I've never seen a ghost before or since, but this happened to me, and it's a true story. And it gave me shivers up my spine. I still think about it, those deserted roads up in Epping Forest, and this ghostly old man, getting on a bus and then never getting off. So what's your story, Richard?
This was a piece of research that was done by a friend of mine called Mike Hallowell, who's a Fortean researcher from Newcastle. He wrote, as far as I know, the world's only study on imaginary friends from all over, cultures from all over the world, and finds that the children had the same sort of imaginary friend all over the world. But that's not what I'm talking about here. That's just one of his more interesting books. He was doing research into a place called Marsden Grotto, which is in South Shields, near Newcastle. And Marsden Grotto is a pub that's actually in a cave in the side of a sheer cliff that's over 100 feet tall. And it was created in the 18th century by a man called Blaster Jack. And he worked in a quarry, and when he retired, he used a lot of this blasting powder to blast out this cave, and opened it up as a tea shop, and then became very, very rich very quickly. And then when he passed away with no heir, somebody else got it, and they became rich. And there was stories about treasure involved in this cave, but nothing was ever proven. And they had a pillow from the old Lambton Castle there that had a carving of the Lambton worm, the infamous giant serpent that was supposed to have terrorised the area during the 12th century. And Lambton Castle was torn down, but this place had a pillar from Lambton Castle with not only the worm, but several of the Earls of Lambton, their faces carved in it. Now, in the sea around there, there's a story about a sea serpent called the Shoney. And the stories go that when the area was under the Danelaw, the Vikings would sacrifice one of their crew to the Shoney so it would not attack the ship. They'd draw straws or whatever, then someone would trussed up the victim, throat slashed, thrown overboard so the creature would eat them rather than attack the ship. And Mike uncovered these stories that this carried on, and it became, rather than a defence, it became more of a worship, and it carried on after the time of the Vikings, and Scandinavian sailors were sacrificing people. And the bodies would wash up as far afield as Lindisfarne, and a lot of them would wash up in Marsden Grotto, Marsden Bay rather, on the beach, or they'd be trussed up and their throats slit, sometimes they'd be partially eaten. And Marsden Grotto, the pub itself, was used as a sort of a impromptu morgue, and these bodies would be laid out in the beer cellar. Now, one of Mike's informants told him that the last body had been found in 1928, so that this cult that worshipped this sea serpent, the Shoney, was making human sacrifices up until 1928. Now, he tried to check police records over it, and because the boundaries have changed in the counties, one lot of police were saying, oh no, it's the other police station's got this, they've got the old records, and the other police station was saying exactly the reverse, no, we haven't got them, the other guys had them. So he never got to see the records to confirm this. But the weird thing was that when he was researching this, he got a number of phone calls warning him off it, saying don't poke into this anymore, if you know what's good for you, leave it alone. And he thinks that there's some vestige of this cult still left. And he also claims to have seen the creature himself with his whole family. He was driving along a cliff top, looked out to sea and saw this thing came up out of the sea like the back of a whale, but it wasn't a whale. He could see it was much longer. He could see like a head and a tail and a neck coming off it. And they watched it for about 10 minutes until it sunk again.
Very bizarre, very creepy.
Yeah.
A very strange tale. We've got just time for one more song just to take us out. This is going to be Hitchcock's music from Hitchcock's Psycho, my ultimate all-time favorite film. Thank you very much for joining us on this 2-hour special. I'm your host, Alison Rockbrand. We've had Richard Freeman, our co-host, Philip John with excellent story, and Jonathan Dymond, excellent poetry reading. Thank you, everyone. Next week we've got John Downes. Is that right, Richard?
Yes, John Downes, the head of the Centre for Fortean Zoology.
So that is next week. That should be an excellent interview. And we're going to have some of John's music as well, as usual.